Hello, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour, starting 4 minutes late again. This is a bad pattern to get into. I am Brandon Tessers. I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. I run a coaching and therapy practice called Effective Artistry. That's our fun logo up there in the corner, effectiveartistry.com. If you're interested in therapy and you live in the state of Illinois, or if you're interested in coaching and you live anywhere. But anyway, what this is just a conversation. It's an hour I set aside every week to just be available to talk with whoever is here about whatever whoever's here wants to talk about. I usually pick a topic. I didn't today, but I have plenty in the chamber. I'll choose which thing I'm already thinking about that I think might be fun to talk about. But that's just because it's easier for me to talk instead of sit here silently. That puts too much pressure on people to have to ask questions or get things going. And you don't have to. You can just be here and watch. But I like it more personally if you're here and you're in the chat and you participate in the chat. Q&A is one way this can go for sure, but it's really, I call it an open conversation for a reason. It's not just ask me questions. It's I'm here paying attention to you guys. Even if you're not in the chat, which means I don't have much specific information about you, I'm still paying attention to my idea of what kind of person is here and what they might want and why might you be here. If you're in the chat, you can clarify for me and give me some actual, specific information about who you are and what you want or whatever that guides me, as opposed to just my guesses about what people might find interesting. So that's why it's more fun for me. And just so that you know, if you are watching this on YouTube, if you post in the chat, it'll be with the Google account that you're logged into. If you're watching on Facebook, it'll be with the Facebook account you're logged into. And if you're watching on Twitch, it'll be on the Twitch account. So if your Facebook especially, and or your YouTube has your real name and you don't want it to be, and you want to talk about things without worrying about that, you can go create something on Twitch, or you can just make another fake account. I don't know if that's allowed or if I'm technically telling people to break the user license or whatever on Google. You're not supposed to, I don't know. Ooh, I like this. We have a question right away, so I don't even have to start picking a topic. Any thoughts on the importance of sleep versus the anxiety of trying to get enough sleep? I'm going to make an assumption here, and please correct me. I find that to be a much more efficient, instead of me saying, okay, I think it could be this, but it could be other things, so let me ask the question first and see. It's more efficient to just say, here's what I think you mean, but I'm aware that it could be something else, and just please correct me. I'm not going to be upset. I'll be glad to know. I think what you're probably referring to, because it comes up a lot, is if I fall asleep now, I can get 5 hours of sleep. If I fall asleep now, I can get 4 hours of sleep. The anxiety of, oh man, I need sleep, and then trying to make yourself sleep, making it more difficult to sleep. That it's like a feedback loop, it is a feedback loop. So if that's the case, we'll keep talking about it. If not, correct me. Okay, sleep is important. And if there is something that is important, particularly if you deem that it is relevant to a problem that you're having. So it's not that sleep is important in and of itself. It's that there's something else you're experiencing, a feeling of being tired or exhausted, or noticing that even if you don't feel tired, noticing that what you do seems as though you have less energy, or you're not as sharp, or whatever version, whatever. Sorry, my beard is looking strange to me today. I don't know. If you deem that it is relevant to that, then you're going to think about it. Think about what you can do to change the sleep in order to change the problem. And sleep is one that people go to very quickly for good reason. It's an obvious one, and it does impact everything that you do. It's one of the few things that impacts literally everything that you do. So we think about it a lot. Now, anxiety, the way we talk about it here, just as a refresher in case anybody doesn't remember, or for people who are new, I find the most utility in talking about anxiety as the gap between how important it is to you that a certain thing go a certain way versus how confident you are that that thing will go that way. So it's inevitable if you are thinking of a thing, if you're aware of a thing that you want to be different than it is, there is some level of anxiety, the way that we're using the word. Usually that's very small to the point where it's barely noticeable, but enough to get you to do something, right? Like my mouth is slightly drier than I want it to be, and therefore that causes anxiety. That anxiety is so small that I don't really notice it, but it's also small and I don't really notice it because I resolve it quickly, because that provides an impulse to then do what I need to do and take a drink to resolve it. The longer that you are thinking about something that's different than you want it to be, the more intense your experience of anxiety around that thing will be. And yes, with sleep in particular, feeling anxious about it, this is true of everything, but sleep in particular, feeling anxious about it decreases your ability to make it be what you want it to be. Anxiety is for thinking, not for doing. And then doing is, necessary to do anything. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here. In other words, if you think sleep is important, and I think that it is, and there's a reason we all think that it is, there's good reason to believe that, and you think you're doing it improperly in some way, and you think the fact that you're doing sleep incorrectly in some way then results in whatever problems that you're having, you're going to be anxious about it. So how do we make it less? How do we make it so that you can be anxious about it, want it to be different, think about how you can make it different in a way that doesn't actually interfere with it? And for that, my best suggestion is to think about other solutions. Whether or not you enact those other solutions doesn't matter as much. In other words, sleep is important on that anxiety thing, right? The gap between how important it is to me that something go in a particular way and how confident I am that it will go that way. Sleep is important. There's nothing we can do about that. If you're aware of it, you're aware of it. You might disagree, and that's fine. But if you think that it's important, I'm not going to be able to convince you that it's not. But I can help you to see that it's not as important that sleep go in a very particular way, primarily with two things. Number one, to point out that all the stuff you know about sleep is helpful, valid, useful, but very limited. It doesn't mean what you think that it means, and we can talk about that here on the stream. But number two is to come up with at least the idea. The more that you believe that there are other things that could be done to solve the same problem, the less anxious you'll be. So here's a good one there that is generally applicable. We have research on this now, but you probably also have anecdotal personal experience of this, that being restful is beneficial in the same way that sleep is beneficial, not to the same extent. In other words, if you are laying there in bed with the intention to go to sleep, you are resting in an observable, measurable way. We have research on this. They've studied it. Laying in bed with the intention of sleeping isn't as restful, isn't as recuperative as sleeping, but it is restful and recuperative. If any of you have ever had a night where, I'm going to say the thing that happens to me has happened to me because that's what I know, but we can talk about other versions of this. I like to read to go to sleep. I don't do it as much these days because I have 3 young children and busy work, and I'm tired and I fall asleep as soon as my head hits the pillow, but that wasn't always the case for me. And reading was my best way to get to sleep, which, as just a quick side note, if part of what you're asking about is what are better ways to be able to get to sleep, giving your brain stimuli that can be interrupted at any point without causing a problem, because you can pick back up later on, but it does pay attention to, it does find some value, whether that's relying on a sensitivity like white noise machines for people who pay attention to sounds, for example, but random and therefore not predictable, and therefore you can't get rid of it. So you can still pay attention to it, but it doesn't cause a problem for you to interrupt. So reading was that for me, because I know concepts. If I'm reading, then the words are evoking concepts in my mind. Listening to the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Interesting. I know very little about that. It sounds like it would probably help me to fall asleep. There's a reason we fall asleep when we're reading or doing boring, monotonous, repetitive things just generally. Because sleep is actually the process of consciousness shutting down. And of course, there are a lot of other processes happening as well. There's a lot of things that the body does when it's asleep So the transition into sleep is preparing to do those things. But mostly what we're talking about and noticing is the process of our consciousness shutting down, whatever that exactly means. We know a lot more about the biology of that than we do about the mechanics of that. Like, interestingly, we don't really know. We know why we sleep, right? We know why humans sleep. We don't know why we evolved in that way. Like, what's the advantage of, there's theories, lots of theories. I'm not saying we have no idea. I'm saying we haven't been able to identify specifically, oh, it's this thing. Descriptions of war, which I get bored of really quickly. A bit stressful because of all the death and stuff, but most of it's chronological history. Yeah, cool. There's lots of podcasts out there these days that are like intended for you to fall asleep to. Honestly, I don't mean this as a plug, but my podcast is probably really good to fall asleep to. I have a deep voice. I talk a lot. It's probably relatively soothing, etc. Anyway, so for me, there have been times where I sit in bed and start to read, and usually I would fall asleep within 10 to 15 minutes of that, so I didn't get very far. Every once in a while, there would be a night where I get reading, and whether it's because I'm interested in the book or whether it's because of some other reason, who knows, but for whatever reason, I'll read for like 5 hours without falling asleep. When I was younger, that caused me a lot of stress because I would do that thing. Oh, crap, I'm going to be so tired tomorrow. Anxiety. I'm starting to think about the future. What's tomorrow going to be like? And I'm worried it won't be like the way I want it to be because of what's happening right now. But I realized at a certain point that I'm not going to claim I haven't fallen asleep to effective artistry video. Good. If your response to what I'm doing is to fall asleep, good. I'm glad you fell asleep. Why would I be, I get why people would be offended or insulted by that, but it's just because you needed sleep. Like, cool. And that you didn't think it would cause you a problem to fall asleep. Doesn't mean that you don't think that there's anything you might miss out on that you would like to know if you didn't fall asleep. Just means that you don't think that that was your only chance at it and it was vital and you have no other options, Like it might be in school where you're like, oh, I can't fall asleep because I need to know this for the test. I want this to be low stakes, low cost. You don't have to do any kind of thing. So I'm glad you fell asleep. Back to what I was trying to say when I opened all this up before I went down 3 or 4 different rabbit holes. So when I would sit there and read like that for 5 hours, I actually didn't end up feeling that tired the next day. Maybe not as rested as had I slept, although it's hard to compare one day to another day. But I would notice there would be days where I'd sleep for 2 or 3 hours and then go through my day and actually be fine. So later on, I learned about the research that supports that, that laying there with the intention to be restful, is regenerative. So hopefully that decreases some of your anxiety, because when I didn't realize that, when I thought of it as a problem that I was reading, then I'd want to do all kinds of things to try and get myself to sleep. But even thinking about and coming up with the ideas of what to do was in and of itself not restful. I'm trying to solve a problem instead of just being, Sometimes it would lead to things like getting out of bed and doing, drinking warm milk. I never tried that, but, whatever various things I had tried that actually got me out of bed. And I think there's value to getting out of bed sometimes. But once I became comfortable with the idea that if my body thinks it needs to fall asleep, it will. If my body, of which the brain is part of the body, thinks that reading this book is more interesting, as long as I'm not thinking it's important, because that I want to deal with differently. If I'm like trying to stay awake when I would otherwise fall asleep because I think it's important to read, I want to address that. But if it's just, no, I'd be happy to fall asleep at any point, then as long as I read is as long as I read. Because how much sleep you need changes night to night, week to week, month to month. So that, I think, like, that's the most generally applicable, I think, thing that I can say is if you're in bed with the intention to sleep, you're doing a good job. It might be more restful to actually fall asleep, but you're fine. So learn how to be comfortable with that. Learn how to be comfortable with the idea, whether that's reading a book or whatever thing that you need, with the idea of resting in bed with the intent to sleep, even though you're not actually falling asleep, because then you won't be as anxious and cause all the problem. Anxiety is a draining experience. It costs you energy. It doesn't give it to you. I don't fall asleep unless I'm actively trying to, so it becomes an executive functioning thing. Lately, I've been trying to do something related to sleep as a task that's not sleep. I'm not parsing that last sentence. What do you mean lately I've been trying to do something related to sleep as a task that's not sleep? Meaning like something that you consider to be an element of the process of falling asleep, you're trying to engage in another task which contains that same element. So for example, if you're saying washing my face is something I do before going to bed, then I want to engage in another activity that's not sleep, but that does also have me wash my face. Is that what you're trying to say? If not, help clarify for me. Yeah. So falling asleep, like everything, is just way more complicated than we want it to be. And I know a lot about this. I've had a lot of incentive to look into this and talk to people who research it and know. And I still feel like I know very little about it. Recommended listing something alphabetically. Fall asleep, right? Oh, right. Okay. So yeah, okay. So what you're talking about is still doing something for the express purpose of falling asleep. You're doing it because you hope it will get you to fall asleep, but you're trying to do something that takes so much of your cognitive resources that the task itself makes it so that you are not capable of thinking about the fact that you're trying to fall asleep, even though that's what you're trying to do. And yeah, that's what counting sheep is for, or the alphabet, counting backward, start at 100 and count backward by nines or whatever. Anything that takes all of your resources so that you forget that you're trying to fall asleep can work. The problem is that that can be really difficult if you know that you're only doing it in order to fall asleep, because if nothing else, you might keep checking back in. Am I almost asleep yet? And there's, it's very disruptive to the falling asleep process to try to self-monitor, because that's what sleep is. Your brain doesn't turn off when you're asleep, obviously. Your body continues to function. In fact, dreaming, again, lots of theories, don't know exactly what it is. Some theories I like more than others. But we all have anecdotal lived experience of, well, my brain is doing something when I'm asleep. So it's not that the brain is turning off. It's that the self-monitoring process is turning off. Consciousness, the ability to monitor what I'm thinking and noticing and feeling. My body still notices it. A sound can still wake me up. A change in temperature, a change in, somebody who's shaking the bed. I'm still picking up all that data. I'm just not consciously aware of it. I'm not monitoring it. So checking in on how you're doing and falling asleep is a self-monitoring process, which is antithetical to sleep. Yeah, you're trying to get yourself to forget. I feel like most of the things I do to sleep are things to try to forget that I'm trying to sleep. So number one, you're approaching this as a cognitive problem, which it is to some extent. Otherwise, none of that stuff would work, right? You wouldn't look at it. Meaning you're approaching this as the reason that you're struggling to fall asleep is because you're thinking too much. And that is a very, very, very common way of approaching this, because it's obviously true, right? Like, I want to sleep and I'm not sleeping. So what do I notice? I notice that I'm thinking. So maybe that's the problem. And then I do some things to try and get me to stop thinking altogether or to stop thinking about sleep. And it seems to go better and I fall asleep. So now we've identified, not only was it my theory, I've tested it, and it seems like there's something to it. But that's a sticky answer. Not completely, because it is practically useful. But it means that we don't look at the other stuff. What else could be done that might help you to fall asleep? And most stuff that people recommend in terms of sleep hygiene or how to help fall asleep faster, which, by the way, sleep onset, that's the term for from when you start intending to go to sleep to when you actually fall asleep. That period is called sleep onset. Is one of two things that, in my experience, people tend to look at: sleep onset and quantity. How much from sleep onset to being awake, how much time passed? Those tend to be the variables that everybody looks at. And that's the reason for that too. They're good and they're important, but there's others. Oh man, that's what's on my medical record: delayed sleep onset. So there's actually a disorder Delayed sleep phase disorder. No, delayed sleep phase? What's the word I'm looking for? Something sleep phase disorder. I'm completely blanking. Anyway, the diagnostic criteria for which is that the person regularly goes to sleep 2 or more hours after what is considered culturally appropriate and wakes up 2 or more hours after what is considered culturally appropriate. And I love that disorder because it makes it so clear that all disorders are judged in relation to what is considered the cultural norm. Is feeling sad a normal and universal human experience? Yes. But we identify what we think is normal, appropriate level of sad. And then if it goes too far in one direction or the other, then we start to say, oh, it's a disorder. And that's useful. I'm not trying to take away. Those are real and valid and useful things. It's just, it's important to know if you sleep from 1 a.m. to 11 a.m. every night, that would be delayed sleep phase disorder. No, that's going to bother me. Delayed sleep phase, delayed sleep onset. Anyway, even though it might not ever actually cause you a problem, but because it's the cultural norm. Anyway, if I ask people, how do you sleep? Do you have any problems with sleep? And they say, no, I'm good. They'll almost always start by saying either, no, as soon as I lay down, I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime. That's how they say they don't have problems with sleep. Or, no, I get 8-9 hours a night. I get enough amount. People almost never pay attention to, because of course it's difficult to pay attention to, sleep quality from when you fall asleep until when you wake up. How does that sleep go? What phases? And people are becoming more aware of that because we have much, much better and more available sleep tracking technology. Oh man, I'm just ranging all over the place on sleep because it's important. Anyway, back to the anxiety at the beginning. Until I get another specific question, I gotta focus in on that specific one. We're trying to decrease the importance of a specific outcome around sleep. Not that sleep itself isn't important, but that it's not that important that it goes this particular way. Some of that we can do through the research, and I've given you some, and I can give you some more. Why is my beard bothering me today? I don't know. And we can do that by coming up with other things that, okay, well, even if I only sleep 3 hours tonight, then I can blank, 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 and that'll help with whatever problem I'm worried that the small amount of sleep will cause. Backup plans, contingencies, scenarios. Well, if it takes me 2 hours to fall asleep tonight, then I'll just push that 9 a.m. thing to whatever. Or, if I don't fall asleep until 11, then I'll just won't work out tomorrow or whatever. Or if I don't fall asleep until X time, then I'll get some coffee or an extra shot of, I don't drink coffee, but from what I understand, there are ways to make your coffee stronger in the morning or whatever it is. Sleep is important. It's not as important as people tend to think it is, primarily for that reason. We identify it. Same thing happens with time, by the way, why everyone focuses on time management and ignores all the other stuff. It's very obvious. It's universal. We can tell it affects everything. We have easy ways to talk about it, to remember it, primarily in how we fall asleep and how long we sleep. Everybody knows you're supposed to get 8 hours a night. Oh, wait, no, the research says for adults, you're actually supposed to get 6 hours a night, but for teenagers, it's 8. But actually the research, because all the research shows different stuff. What amount of sleep you need is different from what somebody else needs. And what amount of sleep you need on a given night is different from what you need on another night. Just like the research that says you need to drink 8-ounce glasses of water every day. Do we really think that me, who's 6'5" and 240 pounds, I need to drink the same amount of water by volume as somebody else who's 5'4" and 105 pounds? Do we think that I need the same amount of water on a day where I stayed inside by the fire while it was wintertime versus a day where I was out in the heat sweating all day working? It changes. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, 2 hours of heavy cognitive labor. You looked at a book that said 4 hours. I've seen 2 and I've seen 2.5. I hadn't seen that particular one that said 4. But yeah, the research will be all over the place. Sometime we can talk about research and both its usefulness and its limitations, because it has both. When the research says you should sleep for 8 hours a night, what that means is, in very real terms, under the conditions of this study, the participants in this study performed best as measured by the metrics selected in this study when they had, on aggregate, 8 hours of sleep a night. An average, a statistical average. No individual, even in the study, actually slept exactly 8 hours from beginning to end, or at least it's very unlikely. Certainly out in the real world, it's not about exactly sleeping 8 hours. And everyone will say, well, of course, it's about 8 hours. Well, then where do you put the barrier on about? Is 7 hours and 50 minutes about 8 hours, but 7 hours and 35 minutes is not? It's all arbitrary. The point of the research is not to be prescriptive and say, this is what you must do. The point of the research, well, really the point of the research is to develop treatment and interventions and that kind of stuff, but it gets disseminated and communicated, and how it can be helpful to people who are not researchers and who are not using the research in order to develop treatments and things. How it can be useful to you is as a guide. Are you having trouble being tired and you want more energy, you want to feel more rested? Well, how much sleep are you getting? Without any reference point of how much sleep people tend to get or how people tend to feel, you could say 4 hours, you could say 12 hours, and without that information about what other people do, we don't know if you should get more or less or whatever. With that information, yeah, people tend to do about 8 hours seems to be best. Well, now you have a reference point. Oh, I've only been getting 6. I should try and get more. Or the classic, well, now I'm oversleeping. I'm just as tired as I was before, but I slept 11 hours, so now I'm tired from oversleeping. Or maybe there are other variables besides the amount of sleep that you're getting that are impacting your tiredness that didn't change, even though the amount of sleep you're getting did change. Anyway, sources you can look at for that. Here's what research actually says rather than someone who wrote a book interpret. You mean about the cognitive labor? I'm mostly pulling on industrial psychology there, and I don't have the specific name of the people who ran the study to point you at. But if you look under industrial psychology, that's where people will study people at their workplace. That's where the research is done. Anyway, hopefully some of that is helpful, and I'm happy to talk more. But guide me. That's about reducing anxiety. Sleep is a very common and relatable example, because everybody experiences it, of a problem that is much more broad than that, which is that thinking about things doesn't mean that you're doing things. And more than that, people tend to know that part. Thinking about things impedes your ability to do those things in the moment. To do a thing, you might have thought about that thing in advance in order to prepare for it. But if you're thinking about it as you're doing it, it makes it more difficult. That's why when we learn, for example, something new, we're not as fluent, we're more stilted and disjointed at the beginning, because we have to keep thinking about it consciously. So we do a thing, stop, think, do a thing, stop, think. It's only later on when we've got those patterns, call it muscle memory or skill or whatever, reinforce the neural pathways, that we don't have to think when we execute it. And so it just happens like that. Thinking not only doesn't help you do a thing, it actually makes it harder. And I can prove it right now. Say something, anything out loud. You don't have to say it out loud. You can just imagine, but you can say anything. The only rule I'm giving you is you have to think about every single word that you say. You have to consciously choose. You have to know what the word is that you're going to say before you say it. And if you do it, you will see it does not sound like how you regularly talk. It is way slower and more interrupted, and the tone isn't right. You have to, and by the way, notice that I can't look at you right now because I have, etc. What does that mean? It means that normally when you're talking, you're not actually thinking about the specific words. Just like normally when you're reading, for most people, you're not thinking about the specific letters. You're just interpreting the word. Or some people will then just not even think about the specific words, but just get the phrase or the sentence or the paragraph. when you're first learning to read, not only are you thinking about the specific letters, you're actually thinking about the specific shapes of the image on the paper in front of you in order to then connect it to a letter, which then connects to a sound, which then, etc. Thinking makes it harder to do stuff. In sports psychology, it's often called the yips. The classic example is a second baseman who all of a sudden can't throw to first base, which is something that he's done hundreds of thousands of times before. For non-sports, it's when you're in an awkward situation and you ask yourself, how do I know, what am I supposed to do with my hands? What looks normal? If you are paying attention to your hands, if you're thinking about what your hands are doing and how they might look, it's not normal. You can't, because normally you don't pay attention to your hands. So there's no version of that that's going to feel normal to you. That's why it's a classic joke in every act normal. You can't do it. Just generally, don't think, just do, or do or not. You know, the Yoda thing, do or do not, there is no try. I love that quote, but I hate how it's usually considered. Is that different from like muscle memory? I'll come back to that in a second. Because I don't know what it was meant, you know, when it was written. I don't know what George Lucas or whoever wrote the script meant by it, but I know that mostly when people talk about it, it is talked about as meaning like, if you want it bad enough, you'll do it. If you're just going to say you're try, that means that you don't really care enough. Just do it, or don't do it, but choose. It's all under your control. And I hate that message because that's not true. All of us intend to do certain things, accomplish certain things, and then we do stuff to try and make that happen, and we fail like all the time. It's not all under control. Why I do like, the way I like to interpret that quote, do or do not, there is no try, is to say that there is only what's happening. It's separating observation, what you're doing, what is happening, what exists, from connection. Try would mean I'm doing this in an attempt to have this impact. I kind of like to think that that's the Jedi philosophy. That's more fun for me, that Yoda's trying to say, stop thinking about the impact you're trying to have. Just focus on what you're actually doing. Because I think that's helpful, whereas I think the other version of interpreting that quote is terrible. Is that different from like muscle memory? So I can't say for sure, obviously, in like terms of like the specific biology of what muscle memory is versus skill or knowledge or whatever. I can talk more about what happens in the brain, which is the simple way of saying it is neurons that fire together, wire together. That in order for your body to do anything, in trying to do the thing, you are doing the thing. No, I mean it as, or I interpret it as, trying means you're focused on what impact, what outcome you're doing a thing with the intention or the hope that it results in a thing. So it means that you're thinking about the results, which aren't present yet and can't be, instead of thinking about what you're doing. Basically, how the brain is supposed to work, how thinking is supposed to work, is we come up with what's worth trying. The more that you are convinced, and a lot of people are very convinced of this in our culture, the more that you're convinced that you can think up what will happen or what will work, the worse you're going to be at doing anything. You will never make attempts. You'll make them very rarely and only under great duress, because that's not actually possible. You can't figure out what will work. For practical purposes, you can, and you do it all the time. That's why it's so much harder, especially for people who tend to have a lot of success that way. That if you're thinking, oh, you know what, if I do X, then Y will happen, and you do X and then Y happens, great. You made an accurate prediction, still limited, but it turned out to be useful. Doesn't mean that you were right, and it certainly doesn't mean that you can be right the next time. But we tend to think that it does mean that. So then we're saying, well, okay, I want Y to happen. Let me think about what needs to happen in order for Y to happen. Okay, if I do X, then Y will happen. I think that's the more useful way to think of it, that what you're doing is thinking about Y instead of thinking about X. That prevents you from making an attempt in the scene. And yeah, I know a good amount about Star Wars, surprise, surprise. In the scene, what he's trying to communicate to Luke is that Luke is afraid of failure in that moment. When he's saying, I'm going to try, what he means is, I think I'm going to fail, or I'm worried I'm going to fail. So I want to set up an expectation. I want you to know that I know that this might not work, because I'm worried if I say it will work and then it doesn't, of how you might perceive me, that you might think not only did I fail, but that I was unaware that I might fail. That's what we're talking about. Try, right? It's just a way of saying, I don't know if this will work. But we usually only say that as though that's a bad or unusual thing. I'm going to try, but I don't know if it will work. You never, ever know if it will work. If you're trying to think about and figure out something that will work before you attempt it, you'll be wrong sometimes. You might be right a lot of the time, but you'll be wrong sometimes, and you'll feel terrible every time you're wrong because you put so much effort. You really invested in the idea that that would work. If instead you just say what's worth trying instead of what will work, then you're not going to feel as bad when you try something and it doesn't work out the way you thought. You knew it might not. It was the best idea you could come up with, so let's give it a try and see what happens. Decoupling from the outcome. Yeah, well, I kind of think of it, I mean, this is a little woo-woo, I suppose, but hey, we're talking about Jedi and whatever. I have a lot of thoughts about the Jedi philosophy. I kind of think of it as the easiest way to phrase it is mind body. People talk about that all the time, especially in like yoga and a lot of holistic practices. Mind body balance. In terms of executive functioning, the question is how much of your resources, particularly your attention and your awareness, of all of the resources you have, what portion of those resources are going toward observing the actual physical environment, which includes your body. Your body exists in the physical environment, versus how much of those resources are going towards thinking about concepts, which are useful and valid and great, but not real, not actually present in any physical, observable way. What should happen, theoretically, is quick cycles. I observe, I get some information, observe some stimuli from the environment, including my own body. Then I think about what I might want to do in response. Then I do it, and then I observe what happens. We want it to be fast. I come up with an idea, I try it, I learn. If you talk to experts in any field, well, there are two kinds of experts, I suppose. If you talk to the kinds of people that I would consider experts in any field, they will have far less certainty about anything that they do within that field than people from outside of the field will. Somebody from outside of biology will say, it's very clear and simple, it's this or it's this. And then you talk to an actual biologist, someone who's an expert, and they'll say, well, it's complicated. We don't really know. We definitely know it's not just this or this. There's a lot more than that, but we're not exactly sure what does what, and blah, blah, blah. What should happen as you gain expertise, and by expertise, I mean a combination of personal experience with a thing, but also knowledge. Knowledge, I mean information you got from someone else communicating the information, evoking the concepts in your mind, as opposed to actually experiencing them yourself physically. As you gain expertise, what we would want to happen is you become less and less certain that anything you do will work the way you're hoping it will work. But that actually makes it much, much easier for you to make an attempt. So you engage with things and try things and do things a lot easier and a lot faster, because you know that you don't know what's going to happen. So you just got to try it and see what happens. That's the basics of science, right? You don't know what's going to happen. You have a theory, a hypothesis, and then you test the theory. But for various reasons, and it all makes sense, but doesn't always have the greatest impact. For various reasons, we tend to generally think, no, I can figure this out in advance. And I haven't figured it out yet. So until I do, I'm not going to try anything, which is the other kind of expert. We don't need to talk about that a lot, but there are some people that believe, sorry, it's the last day of school here, and there's a bunch of kids saying some chant outside. I couldn't quite make it out. Some people, as they gain expertise, experience, and knowledge, become convinced that they actually do know what will work. I don't know which one is more common. Yeah. I was kind of like subtly evoking the concept of gender with the example that I was using there. But yeah, I've talked to a lot of people in a lot of different fields because I have weird questions and I want to ask experts about them. So I'll ask people like, okay, is this binary? Because I have this idea that nothing is binary. So then I try and find, well, what about this? Like a 1 or a 0 in coding. And so then I find someone who knows about it and I ask them. And so far, everything people have said, nope, not binary. Anyway, just got distracted by that comment. I guess not distracted. That's the point. It's a conversation. But I feel like I left something hanging that I didn't resolve, and I can't remember what it was. Oh, well. Oh, expert. The other kind of expert is somebody who believes that their expertise means that they not only can determine what will work, but that they actually already know what will work. They know what will happen. That makes people less able to do. They're still able to make attempts very quickly, just like the kind of that I think is really, you can still try things very fast because you know it'll work. But of course, it doesn't always work. So the difference is for one person, they say, oh, that didn't work how I thought it would. I wonder what I'm missing. What can I learn? For the other, oh, that didn't work how I thought it would. Somebody else must have messed it up. You didn't do it right. I told you what to do, and it would have worked if you did it, but you didn't do it. And that, what follows on from that is a lot of what we're talking about and everybody's dealing with is people who have the power and the expertise and the knowledge saying, this is how it works. And then the lived experience being, nope, maybe sometimes, but definitely not all the time. And that their response to that is being, that's because you as an individual did it wrong, not because I am incorrect in what I said. People need 8 hours of sleep. If you're getting 8 hours of sleep and you aren't feeling rested, well, maybe you're doing it wrong. I don't believe that you are getting 8 hours of sleep or blah, 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 whatever. Struggle to understand and accept differences. Yeah. Well, it's the more you learn about a thing, either that enables you, all right, executive functioning level, right? In Invisible Gorilla, they talk about the fallacy of someone sounding like they know what they're talking about without referencing things, when the person who's more experienced in the field is the one who needs to pull references. Okay. I like that, but there's also problems with that. Pulling references is a particular way of gaining expertise. It's about gaining knowledge, but not only just knowledge from identified credible sources. Credibility is about social markers. If someone's a doctor, an expert, if they've won awards, they're credible, but that's cultural and social idea, right? So needing to pull references in terms of, to prove my point, I need to say, I got it from this other place. That's the appeal to authority fallacy. Doesn't matter who you got it from. That doesn't change. It might change my willingness to go along with it because I care, I value about the markers of credibility you're pointing at. Makes it seem to me that it's more worth trying. If somebody like that said it's worth trying, sure. But it doesn't actually mean it's right or that it will work either. If what you mean by needs to pull references is they're not carrying the information around in their head because it's too much and it's too complex, but that the information they're carrying around in their head is where to find the information, that I think is great. That's a very efficient way of, that it's part of what's happening to us all with the internet, right? That more important than remembering the specifics of a thing, if it is a thing, well, the ability to identify accurately, is it a thing that I can find online or not, and how easily or how much it will cost me to do so. Because a lot of things, it's not worth knowing that. Why do I need to know all the specifics if I know how to find it? That's what reference material are supposed to be. Specific example was who we see as an expert, someone who seems very confident versus someone who's not confident. Just because you're confident doesn't mean you're right. Yeah, well, so here's the thing about confidence. In practical terms, not social and communicative terms, like what I might read as confidence in you. Yeah. No, I appreciate you clarifying. That's the point, right? The communication. You say it as simply as you think is necessary. You say it as complex as you think is necessary in order to get whatever you're trying to get to happen. Only after the fact, sometimes you'll realize, because the other person asks or clarifies in some way, or just seems to be responding differently. Oh, that wasn't enough. Let me add some more. We're always trying to do the minimum. We should be. I hate that idea that there's something wrong with like trying to find more efficient ways to do what we're trying to do. Why wouldn't we want that? Why is that lazy? Anyway. Confidence. For practical purpose, confidence, what we're talking about is willingness to do the thing. Confidence. I'm confident enough in the idea that I'm about to execute that I'm willing to execute it. But then we can break it down further. Sometimes it's confidence that what I'm about to do will work. And that, I think, generally is problematic. If it does work, we're talking about those kinds of experts that don't pay much attention to the specifics, because why would I? I know what's going to work. I don't need much detail about what's actually happening here. If you try it, or I say to do it and you do it and it doesn't work, no, that's not on me. There's something you didn't tell me or whatever. If you are confident and you try it and it doesn't work, confident in that way, thinking it will work, and it doesn't work, it shatters your confidence, which means that it's harder for you to try something next. What we want to know is what's worth trying. Yeah. So confidence, another way of being confident is I'm confident that it won't kill me, a version of that. I'm confident that in attempting this thing, it's not going to cause undue problems. Will it work? I don't know. But I did investigate it enough to determine that I can try it. Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes I think it won't cause problems even if it doesn't work, and it actually causes big problems. Uh-oh. That happens. But that's the kind of confidence that I'm looking for. Adaptability. We talk about this in grit and resilience too. People think of that as stubbornness, that I try a thing and it sucks and I hate it and I don't see any benefit in it, but people are telling me that there's benefit in it. So I keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And eventually it pays off. Ooh, grit and resilience. That's a terrible, terrible message to teach people. It is literally, and I know this word gets overused a lot, it is literally gaslighting, telling somebody that when their own senses, their own body is saying to them, this is bad, this doesn't seem worth doing, this is hard, this hurts you, telling them, no, ignore that. Your body is going to tell you it's bad. I'm telling you it's good and it's worth doing. You just won't realize it until later. But believe me, when you get to that later point, you'll realize it, and then you'll say, oh yeah, you were right, Brandon. I'm glad I kept doing it, even though my own body was telling me to stop doing it. The shitty thing about, I'm so good about not swearing on the stream. The crappy thing about that, whether we're right or wrong, is that we're getting people to to neglect their own input, their own data in favor of information from another person. And we do train people. That's what school is. And it's not inherently bad. We want to know what other people think we should be doing. We're social creatures. It's important to understand how we're impacting people and to learn from other people what they think will work. But grit and resilience, we shouldn't teach that as, oh, if it hurts and you hate it and it sucks, keep going anyway because it will pay off. Because A, that's not always true. And if I'm doing something somebody told me to do and it hurts and I don't like it and it doesn't pay off, well, then what was I doing? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So it's not that it's always wrong or it's abusive or it's terrible to tell people to even though this isn't fun right now, keep going. Yeah, that's true. Anything that you learn to do is going to be a lot less pleasant at the beginning than it will be later on. It's just about balancing it correctly. I think the way to talk about grit and resilience is to talk about adaptability. We mix up the goal, the aim, and the theory. For a second, it was going to sound like I said the goal, the aim, and the theory is three different things. Aim is just a preferable word for me to goal. The aim and the theory. In other words, right now, the question that started this, your aim is to get more sleep or better sleep or shorter sleep onset, some version of that. But you only are doing that because it's your theory about something else. The fact that you sleep the way that you sleep isn't in and of itself observably, experientially a problem for you. Something is a problem, and you have connected, and this has nothing to do with whether it's an accurate theory or not. It's just pointing out the connection. Something is an observable problem. Some experience is unpleasant, uncomfortable, painful, scary, dangerous, something that you've then connected. The resolution to this problem would be if I sleep differently. And that's great. It's a great theory to test. If you test it and it doesn't work, what I want is adaptability then to say, okay, my theory was sleep didn't work. Whether it didn't work because I couldn't get myself to go to sleep earlier, whether it didn't work because I did go to sleep earlier, but the problem continued, doesn't matter, it just didn't work. So let me go back to what the problem was and come up with a different theory to test. But what mostly happens is, here's the problem. I come up with a theory of what will work. I try the theory. Either it works, great. Usually that's the case. Or it doesn't work, and now my new problem is I can't test this theory. So now I'm coming up with new theories that will enable me to test this theory, and I forgot about the actual real problem at the beginning. So I think grit and resilience is about adaptability, holding on to the goal and shifting the attempts to reach it. It's not bang your head against the wall. I want to get to the other side of this wall. I'm going to run into it. Ooh, that hurt, and it didn't seem to get me any closer. Just keep doing it. That's how grit is usually talked about. You keep throwing yourself against that wall long enough, it'll come down. I want somebody to maybe try that once, be like, whoa, that hurt, and it didn't seem to be worth it. Is there anything else I can try? Maybe I'll climb the wall. Maybe I'll try and see if I can get around the wall. Maybe I'll call out and see if there's somebody over there. Why did I want to get to the other side of this wall in the first place? Maybe I can get that in some other way. I spend a lot of time trying to tease out if I'm sleep deprived, depressed, or burned out, and in the end, I just assume it's all of that. Yes, it is all of that. And I mean that in two ways. Number one, neither of them is the way that it probably sounds like. Like, yep, you have correctly identified all of the issues. No. Number one, those are just terms. They're constructs that we use to apply to things. Like, what specifically is the difference between depressed and burnt out? I know that you probably have a clear distinction. Certainly there are some general consensus ideas about this is burnout, this is depression, but there's a lot of overlap. And I don't care who you are, if you have an idea, no, this is burnout, this is depression, there's somebody else out there with the flipped idea, no, that's depression, that's burnout. So it's all of those things, because it's anything that you are finding utility in using that construct, that way of looking at it. If thinking of it as burnout, the point of thinking of it as burnout is not to correctly and accurately identify what's happening. It's, if I think of it as burnout, well, this is what I do when it's burnout. It gives me a theory to try. And then if I try it and it doesn't work, does that mean it's not burnout? I don't know. No, maybe. Doesn't matter. Just means that the purpose of thinking about it as burnout was to come up with something to do. And the thing you came up with didn't work. I can come up with something else by thinking of it as burnout. Well, maybe sometimes in burnout, this other thing. Okay, great. Or I can come up with a completely different theory. Okay, maybe it's not burnout. Maybe it's depression, in which case I would do blank. The number said I'm getting 4 to 5 hours of sleep for some reason or other, and people keep telling me that's bad. According to the research, it is bad. But the truth is, different people need different things. It might be enough. I don't know, and neither do you, right? It's only really useful if you can test it. Can you get yourself to sleep for 7 hours or 8 hours consistently for a week or so and see, do I notice a difference? If yes, okay, it's worth trying to sleep more. Still doesn't mean I'm going to continue to do it, because what does it cost you to do it? Is it worth paying that cost to get the benefit that you're getting out of it? Or maybe you can't test it. Maybe you get 7 or 8 hours and you don't notice the difference, in which case, okay, I now no longer think it's about the amount of sleep. Or maybe you try and test it and you can't get yourself to sleep for 7 or 8 hours, in which case, okay, maybe that would resolve the problem if I could but I can't. And this is the thing I'm trying to focus on, right? Is that you come up with a theory, it's about sleeping more. Then you come up with theories about how to get the more sleep. And when they don't work, you're coming up with other theories to try. Maybe if I do this, maybe if I, alphabetically list birds, then it will help. And you can test those things and see, does it help me fall asleep? Yes or no? Great. But now you're evaluating a whole different set of things, and there's not as much of your resources left to go back to, oh, but wait a second, is getting the more sleep actually doing the thing that I was hoping and thinking it would do? I think it's one of those things where you're treating the symptom and it's just frustrating because the symptom doesn't go away. So there's a phrase that gets discussed a lot: correlation does not equal causation. And again, I think generally, I don't know, but it seems to me that generally people think that means that correlation is just a correlation. It has to be a really strong correlation to call it a causation. That it's used generally to say, that's a correlation. It doesn't mean that the thing caused the other thing. But that they don't say it in a way that precludes the possibility of causality that we can actually identify. So that was the other thing I was saying. You said, is it all those things? And I said, yes. One is because it's about language and what's useful. The other is because whatever you're experiencing at any given moment is what you experienced as a result of literally everything that's ever happened to you and everything in the environment, including things that you're not even aware of, and blah, blah, blah. Trying to suss out what is the reason gets you stuck, because that's back to what will work. What we want to look at is what variables correlate with each other. I don't know if my lack of sleep causes my depression or if my depression causes my lack of sleep. I don't care about causality. What I'm saying is I have noticed that as I get less sleep and as I get more depressed, I can reliably say that the other is true. If I check in and say I'm more depressed, I can say I'm probably also getting less sleep. If I check in and say I'm getting less sleep, I can probably also reliably say I'm more depressed. I don't care about which one causes the other. I just care that it's a correlation. Because some of those correlations are useful. Okay, well, if that's the case, let me try to get more sleep and see if that brings my depression down. Great, useful. Sometimes it's not. Okay, well, let me see if I can get some more sleep and see if that brings my depression down. Crap, I can't get more sleep. Now I'm stuck. As opposed to, okay, what other variables seem to correlate with this thing? What other things seem to impact this thing? What about my medication? What about my diet? What about the types and extent to which I am physically active? And by the way, I say physical activity, not exercise, because sometimes exercising makes the problem worse. There's a thing called post-exertion malaise, which is typically talked about in the context of being clinically significant, a symptom of some diagnosable disorder or disease or whatever. But on another level, which is why some people will point at that clinically significant and be like, everybody gets tired after they do something. Yes, you expend energy and you get more tired. Sometimes the problem is you're doing too much, not too little. The people who say if you exercise you will have more energy, they're saying that because that's how it's worked for them, that when they exercise they notice that they have more energy. But even those people sometimes will be tired and say, I'm not working out today, I don't have the energy for it. But if working out always gives you more energy, we don't know. You just come up with what's worth trying. I'm going to try and sleep better. I'm going to try to do this in order to sleep better. Okay, did it work? Cool. If not, I'm going to try this. But just make sure you keep referencing back to the original problem, the actual lived experience of this is uncomfortable, unsustainable, painful, scary, dangerous, upsetting, whatever it is, unpleasant in some way. Because whatever that is that made you think, oh, if I'll sleep better, then that will resolve the problem. If you sleep better and you focus on that, you might have, hey, I'm sleeping better. I finally did it. But the original problem is still there because you forgot about it. I still feel tired all day. I'm proud of myself for sleeping 8 hours. Why do I still feel tired? And that's when we get into the, I guess I'm just broken because I did the thing that you're supposed to do that results in the thing I wanted to get, but I didn't get what I wanted to get. So what's wrong with me? Too bad it's hard to be productive when you haven't slept well. Yes, and other variables too. On 2 days, 2 separate days where you slept exactly the same, one day you'll still be more productive than the other. So what are the other variables? Are any of those things that are easier for you, lower cost for you to change? Will they be enough? I don't know. Maybe you think not. In that case, it's not worth trying. Maybe you think it will. It's worth trying. Maybe you're not sure, and it might be and it might not, and whatever it costs to try, yeah, I'm willing to pay that cost to find out, in which case it's worth trying. The answer, by the way, anytime anybody ever says something like, why do X type of people do Y? Why do people do this seemingly nonsensical or, working against their best interests thing, right? The answer is always because they thought it was the best thing to do. People are wrong. We're wrong all the time. Like, I thought that was what was worth trying. That was my best option. And it turns out later, looking back, yeah, there were definitely better options that I had at that point than that. Sometimes it's our best option. We tried it still has bad impacts. And we look back and say, yeah, that was still my best option at the time. So I need some better options. And we want to be able to distinguish those things. That's all I'm trying to help people do with the language, with all this stuff. I'm just trying to give people the mechanisms to pay closer attention and get more detail, more information, instead of just simplifying everything as, I feel bad because I didn't sleep. Yeah, that's a factor. Probably. It's an important one. There are other factors. It might be that trying to work on your sleep. It's funny. Animal spirits. Anyway, I got to get wrapping up. I don't even know where we went. I barely remember anything I said for the last hour, but it was fun. I hope it was useful. I appreciate the comments and the specific questions. Yeah. Just concrete takeaway. Maybe I should make myself do this at the end of these things just to make sure that I know what concrete things I was saying, because I want there to be something concrete. Concrete takeaway. Number one, sitting in bed with the intention to sleep is restful. Not as restful as sleeping, but it still is restful and recuperative. Number two, if you come up with a theory of how to resolve a problem and can test the theory, great. If it doesn't work, it doesn't matter why it doesn't work. The etiology. Did it not work because I'm lazy? Did it not work because I'm broken? Did it not work because it's a bad idea? Doesn't matter. It didn't work. Let's move on to something else. The only reason that we'd want to think what element of this made it so that it didn't work would be because then we can modify it by changing that element. Oh, it didn't work because I'm lazy? Well, then I got to change the laziness and then it will work. But how do you do that? Whereas it didn't work because my bed is uncomfortable. Okay, can I get a new bed? That's where, we can test it. If any theory that you come up with, any explanation that you or anybody ever gives you about why the problem is happening or what needs to be done to resolve it, if it's not testable, then it better be useful just to know it and think of it that way. If it's not useful to just think of it that way and it's not testable, it's a crap theory. Move on. And the fact that it's not testable or not helpful to just think of it that way for you doesn't mean it's not helpful for other people. So it doesn't mean that the person giving the advice is a bad person or that it's terrible and now you got to proselytize and say, no, you shouldn't do any of that. It just means it didn't work for you. So you move on to the next thing. I want to know more about those people who do. That's something I've recommended to people as a note-taking strategy, but I was unaware that it's a thing that there are people who do it. So if you have a link or something, I don't know, post it. I want to look into it. That's interesting. Now I want to talk about note-taking, but I got to go. Thank you all. I will be here again next Wednesday, 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Central Time. Just doing whatever we do. Give me practical questions. I'll give you practical answers. Give me general questions. I'll give you general answers. Don't say anything. I'll ramble for a long time. Being interrupted is my favorite thing. All right. Thank you, everybody. I will be here next week. Yeah. Goodbye.